My name is Robert, recovered alcoholic, and I appreciate the fact that you termed yourself a recovered alcoholic. I read from the second edition or the third edition mostly. In the foreword to the first edition, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope that these pages will be so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, we're sure our way of living can have its advantages for all. And I want you to know that I'm not going to tell you what to do tonight. I'm going to tell you what we have done. I'm going to tell you what the first 100 did and how I try to emulate that over my 40 years of sobriety. Matter of fact, I was so excited April 25th of 1986 when I walked back into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in Las Vegas, and I never left. And so, and it's kind of cool because quantity has a quality all its own. And the further you go, you can't stay active and stay sober without having a certain amount of quality. Depending upon who you ask, whether you ask my wife or one of my sponsees, will determine what answer you get. But it's true. You can't be in the rooms, can't stay in the rooms a long time without learning through repetition what the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous really, really mean. And I like to read, we feel our way of living can have its benefits for all. And I'm so far removed from the first drink, but I'm not far removed from knowing how to live. Because I like to think that everyone is a phone call away of getting their apple cart turned upside down. And very recently, my wife Laura and I had our apple cart turned upside down, and we're trying to negotiate that. We're trying to find our way through. And sometimes doing nothing is best, although when you're not a very patient person, you want when you want it, that becomes challenging. But learning how to wait on God is one of the most important things that any newcomer could do. Show of hands, how many are within your first year of sobriety? Can I see your hands? Wonderful. How many of you are within your first 6 months? About the same. I hope you have a sponsor. I hope you're going to meetings. I hope you are reading the big book, reading the 12 and 12, going to as much service as possible, because, like I say, those are the things that we have done, because I didn't reinvent the wheel. I didn't have to. It was invented for me from Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith back in the early 1930s. And from there, they launched a program that when we got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, there seemed to be a way for us, because everyone was telling us along the way that we had a problem. For most of us, that problem was alcohol. And we did other things, but I did other things as a direct result of my alcoholism. There was never enough for me to get sideways long enough to go through life head on. Does that make sense? So we learn how to get sideways in different ways, because at some point, alcohol is not going to be enough. We're going to need something else, a person, a place, a thing, a situation, an opportunity to help us get past that, because alcohol just won't be enough. So we engage in different relationships. We go different places. We do different things. We engage with people we normally, it says on page 17, where people who normally would not mix. Well, I didn't mix with the people at the bar either. And I didn't mix well with the people in the drug dens either. But yet, you give me sufficient amounts of alcohol, you give me sufficient amounts of drugs, and I can fit anywhere, right? It's within the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, because we don't have anything that make our feel good, except for the person right next to us. So if you're new or relatively new, and you're seeing if you fit, stick around, because eventually you'll fit. They told me when I first got here that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is a giant rinse that fit any nut who walks in. And I'll tell you, if you're alcoholic, like many of us are in this room tonight, stick around, because If you're not sure you're an alcoholic, they told me, stick around because you'll do till one shows up. And that was really true. It says in the big book that God will show us how to create the fellowship we crave. And that's all we ever wanted. We just wanted to feel like we were a part of. We wanted to feel like when we walked into a room, we were appreciated. So when we tell you to keep coming back, it works when you work it. We really want you to come back because we don't want you to experience the bottom that we know you're going to hit if you go back out and you drink again. Every subsequent bottom is worse than the previous one. In example, when I relapsed after 71 days of sobriety on April 19th of 1986, I was at the Red Butler Motel in Las Vegas on 15th and Fremont. And it didn't surprise me that I got back to where I was. It surprised me how quickly I got back there. And you want to feel despair, you want to feel disillusionment, you want to feel discouragement, then go back out. And what you thought was your bottom, you'll find a new bottom in a relatively short period of time. Father Martin, who, if you don't follow Father Martin on YouTube, you ought to, because his instruction of alcoholism and recovery is some of the best I've ever seen in my 40 years in journey. But it talks about alcoholism as a progressive disease. You know, in the big book it says it gets worse, never better, right? Where we have a compulsive illness. But alcoholism, if we relapse, and any of us are subjected to relapse, because whether you have 4 days, 4 months, 4 years, 40 years, if you don't do the things that you need to do, at one point you'll get back to step one. I'm not powerless over alcohol. And alcoholism is a progressive disease. It progresses even though we're not drinking. Think about that. Think about how if you're sober 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years along the way, think about alcohol waiting for you and think about how you would have been drinking if you haven't stopped. That's why Father Martin says, first a man takes he says, you can handle 1 beer, then you handle 2 beers, then you handle 3 beers, then a quart handles you. And that's how quickly that's occurred. So if you're afraid of relapse, you should be. And I have found that through good sponsorship, AA meetings I can't even count anymore how many I've been to. I was talking to Laura before the meeting, and I think it's like 14,619 days, like a long, long time. And one day at a time, we get to where you want to be an old timer? Don't drink and don't die. That's the quickest way to get there. And along the way, if we stay long enough, if we serve others long enough, we will find we wake up in the same bed and every single night, and we don't wonder how we got there. We don't wonder where our car. Remember those days? The repo man, you had to hide your car. I remember them as if they were yesterday, and sometimes I think they were. And you'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, where am I going to move my car now? And by the way, how did I get here? We don't remember we drove, and yet we end up in a place that's unfamiliar to us. But we know that we need to hide our car, because if the repo man finds it before we do, we lose the car, right? Or a police officer. Remember these days when a police officer would pull behind you and you get that box over, dear God, don't let him pull me over. Dear God, don't let him find this, don't let him find that. And we're afraid of everything. But we did that to ourselves. Nobody did it to us. We did it to ourselves. And we want to blame other people, though. We want to think, if you had my job, if you had my spouse, if you had my family, if you had this, that, and the other, you would be like me. No. We've all have had that on our way to coming here. Some more so than others. Some stories are incredible. I think, how did you last through that turmoil? How did you last through losing all you had to lose on your way here? Fortunately, we have a way that, fortunately, it demands rigorous honesty, and unfortunately, it demands rigorous honesty. That was the result of my relapse back in April 19th of 1986. I was sober 71 days, and I wanted to be like you, so I acted like you. I sounded like you. I didn't do what you did. I just wanted to mimic you. You know, that feeling of camaraderie was really important to me. And so I thought, if you knew what I did, where I went, who I hung out with, what I did, all the things about me, I would be the first person. Maybe you thought this as well. You'd be the first person in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous that they'd ask not to come back. Anyone ever think that? I thought that. I thought, if you only knew me, you tell me to keep coming back, but you tell me because it's a quaint thing to say. It sounds really cool. You don't really mean it because you don't know who I am. And in spite of hearing the stories of people who did worse things than me, it came from me because I felt like I was a nothing. From the earliest remembrances, I came from nothing, I was a nothing, and I was always going to be a nothing. Anyone can resonate with that? But when we drink, we find this place, this happy medium. I know I came from nothing, but it's okay right here, right now, right where I'm going to be. We find that magic elixir. We find that favorite drink. We find that favorite combination we find of drugs and alcohol. And we find that happy space that tells us no matter what's going on, everything's okay right here and right now. Unfortunately, for many of us, F. Scott Fitzgerald said, first a man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes a man. And it happens, it says that alcohol is a subtle foe, and it truly is, because all the while we think we're doing something just to escape however we're feeling right now. But in a short period of time, for me it was a short period of time, from 14 to 18 years old, I was a periodic drinker because I was in high school, and you could only drink so much without getting caught. So you had to smoke a lot of dope, you had to do a lot of Seconal, you had to do a lot of methamphetamine, just to balance things out because you couldn't drink all the time. And so by the time I was 18 years old, alcohol started to exclude me from the equation. Can you remember that? When you were no longer a consideration? In the beginning, we drank because we wanted to, because it made our feel-good feel good. And then after a while, for some of us, it didn't take very long. Some of us took many years. But there comes a certain point where we become chronically addicted, biologically addicted. That phenomenon of craving starts to develop in us. And we're like a runaway freight train. And we don't even see it coming. Bill said if there was a time we could have stopped, we would have stopped. But we blow through those stop signs. Most of us, if you're in this room tonight, it's likely you've blown through that stop sign like me. And next thing you know, we're giving away things that we swore we would keep for the rest of our life, like wives, like jobs, like children. All the things we give away on our way to these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the only thing that saves individuals like you and me is the 12 steps. I believe in the 12 steps as much as I'm standing here. I believe in sponsorship. I believe in the first 164 pages. I believe serving others is the avenue to getting whatever I want in life. Because my ego is not minimized, it's redirected. My ego today is fulfilled when I help another alcoholic. My ego is fulfilled today when I can saw through prayer and meditation in step 11 and find a better path, a better way of doing things to please my higher power. And then, of course, that higher power directs me to others. And when I put God first and others second, I become first. And it's just the way that it is. If you want to feel good about who you are, go help somebody else. If you want to feel good about your position, your recovery. And when I work with a newcomer, I encourage young men and women, mostly young men, to get involved in service right away. So if you're not involved in service, if you're not involved in making coffee, baking cookies, doing something, getting the room ready, young man was out greeting tonight, and find a service position, because I'll tell you, this whole idea of therapy in AA, there's therapeutic value to AA, but AA is not therapy. So you can keep your war stories with your sponsor. the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous are not designed. We share our experience, strength, and hope with each other that we might solve our common problem. Because what happens a lot of times is when I start sharing things that you might not understand, you don't understand. And it makes me feel like you can't help me. But when I share on a feeling and a heart level, all of a sudden, I felt that way. I've lost that. I've lost this. Maybe I can make a difference in this person's life. And that's all what we get here for. You know, by the time I was 4 and 5 years old, I started to feel like someone didn't hear me. I started to feel like I didn't belong at a young age. And the first time I drank at the age of 14, I drank because I could get away with it. Every subsequent time I drank up until 18, I drank because of how it made me feel the first time I drank. Remember that feeling of getting sideways? Of saying, you know, I still have the problems I had. I still don't feel a part of, but it doesn't matter as much as I thought it did, because now I'm getting comfortable. I talk about a lot about going through life sideways, because facing life head on is far too comfortable for a guy like me. You know, I went to bed until I was 11 years old, and it was all anxiety driven. But when you grow up with the nickname of Piss Pot, you know, you start believing what you're told. And by the time I was 18 years old, I went in, and this was my claim to fame. This is the first time I said, I'll show you, I'll kill me. I walked into the registrar's office of January 3rd of 1972. I was going to graduate from high school in May. And I walked into the registrar's office and I said, I'm dropping out of school. They said, you can't do that. And I said, I can do anything I want. I'm 18 years old. Remember that first opportunity of defiance? That was all alcohol related. Had I been comfortable with me, I wouldn't have gone to destroy me. That's one of the reasons I have a higher power, because obviously it's not me, and I'm in charge of my life. And Bob Darrell says it quite well. You know, you need a higher power, because if you run in your own life, you're out to kill you. And so many of us are. And so when we come into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I came in because I was going to die. I met a guy a few weeks ago at a meeting. He was trying to tell me he got here because he was a good guy. I made a decision to come to AA. Yeah, tell me about that. And he said, I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me that I've got a fatty liver. And if I don't do something about my drinking, it's going to turn into cirrhosis, and there's nothing they can do to help me. And I said, what part of that story makes you think you got here because you're a good guy? Like you made a good decision. And so many of us get here through despair. Through, if we lose one more thing, or the wife tells us, if you drink one more time, if you come home drunk, I'm going to change the locks. The boss says, if you show up one more time drunk on a Wednesday, not a Monday, I'm going to fire you. The family says, we're not going to invite you to any more family get-togethers because you show up drunk every single time. All these things that happen to us along the way. I got here because I was going to die. I was 32 years old, and I was going to die, and there was nothing I can do about it. Anyone else ever feel that way? You felt your life was out of control. And I really thought, there used to be voices that I would hear, and all of the voices were family members saying, Bobby, 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 what are you doing? And they were the legitimate questions. What was I doing? Because every time I showed up, I was losing one person, the next person, the next person, the next person. It wasn't a matter if you left, it was a matter of when. How much could you tolerate? And this one day I woke up and I was standing in front of the mirror, and there was no more voices. And when you're 32 years old and you see yourself as dead, literally dying, it scares you in a way that alcohol could never scare me before. And that particular morning, February 9th of 1986, I called up, I spent some time in the yellow pages looking under alcoholism. And at that particular time, I wouldn't have admitted to you that I was alcoholic. But yet I knew to look in alcoholism. And I started to call treatment centers and I said, will you help me? Do you have money? Do you have insurance? Do you have a job? No, no, no. And they said, well, next. And I started to call, and this one Nevada treatment center in Las Vegas, they said, if you can get $50 and be here within a half hour, we'll help you. We'll talk to you. We'll see if there's something we can do for you. So I called my dad up, who was sober at the time, a number of years, and I said, Dad, if I can have $50, and back in 1986, $50 was probably like a couple $100 at least. And he came over, he gave me a ride, and he dropped me off there, and I started my recovery journey. Fortunately, this particular treatment center, they went to Alcoholics Anonymous. They went to the Turning Point in Las Vegas. And anyone here familiar with Las Vegas? Yeah, Las Vegas is not a place to be homeless, right? Or without money, because this whole town revolves on finances. Having you can stay in the night in the casino, providing you have money to gamble with. And so as I was there, as I went into this treatment center, and they took me, after I detoxed for 7 days, they took me to the Turning Point, and it was my first introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was a large room, pool tables, pinball machines, people cutting up. I didn't know they were alcoholic. I just thought they were just people like any other bar, with a coffee bar on the side, but the meetings were in the back. And I immediately gravitated towards these individuals because I knew I wanted what they had. They were happy and grateful at the same time, right? And I was never either of those. I was always wanting something more. I was never quite happy because my life had gone to the point where I'd lost everything, lost everyone. There was nobody left. I was at the end of my second marriage, and everyone had gone out of my life. And I walked into this room, and it was the first sign of hope I'd ever had. But again, there was this thing called honesty that was standing in the way of me and my recovery. And I stayed for 71 days, 71 long days, always trying to figure out how I could get what you had without doing what you did. Because, when we read how it works, rarely have we seen a person fail who has certainly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot completely give themselves to this simple program, right? And so that word honest is used there as well towards the end of that paragraph. And I just couldn't get honest. And it was drinking or be honest, drinking or be honest, and I chose to drink. But I quickly found out that the voices that I stopped hearing were now replaced with your voices. And I was laid up in this hotel room, out of money. It was the last day I could be there in Las Vegas. They're really serious about that. They'll come and take you to jail as they're removing you from the room. And I thought, the voices were replaced with keep coming back. It works till you work it. Think, think, think. Easy does it. Keep it simple, sweetheart. All the things that you taught me. Fortunately, I was still a person who did things based on coercion. And the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous looked better than the streets. And I went back to the rooms, and Max Brooks was my sponsor at the time. And Max was at the noon meeting, the late lunch bunch, at a meeting he never goes to an hour after the meeting was over. And I tried to slide in the back door. You know how we do that? We don't let anyone know. We don't want anyone to know that we realized, but it's pretty obvious because we haven't been there. And I walked in, and Max said, "Are you ready?" He didn't ask me where I'd been, what I'd been doing, because it was pretty obvious. Are you ready? And we got on our knees and we did the third step prayer. And that was April 25th, 1986. And I haven't had a drink since. I wanted to a couple times, but losing everything that I had gained in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then the point where I want to say this, I'm never going to drink again. And I'm not afraid of the word never. And some of you are, and that's okay. Gain experience. It says in I think it's on page 86, 87, talks about step 10, providing we stay in fit spiritual condition. So I intend on staying in fit spiritual condition. That's the only way I can say the word never. And I remember going out to lunch with Scott Shields, Melissa, his girlfriend, and Texas Mike. And you ever meet somebody who knew something that you didn't know before you even asked a question? That's who Texas Mike was. He was like this seer, this guy. His nickname was Texas Mike, but I think he was from Louisiana. And in Las Vegas, everybody had a nickname but me. And what's that? Only in AA. And made perfect sense to me at the time. And I sat there and Mike said, how long were you sober when you relapsed? And I said, 71 days. And he said, how sober are you now? And I did the math real quick in my head and I said, 72 days. And Mike said, see, I told you you could do it. And that hit me at one day at a time more than anything else at all. So if you think you're at the end of your rope and you're newly sober, just stick around. All you have to do, it's 7:30 right now. All you have to do is make it 4.5 more hours and you've got this day done. You can do that, can't you? We all can. And because you made it through all this day. But the point is that Mike taught me that one day at a time. So again, no matter how long we are sober, if we don't remember the days, because Bill says we're not cured of alcoholism, what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And what's really powerful after that sentence, it says, every day is a day I must take God's vision into all my activities. All my activities includes you. So when we go into treatment centers, when we go into prisons, when we go into institutions, when we start a meeting, we do so with the idea of others knowing we're going to be helped. Because again, there's nothing like helping someone else to make you feel good about who you are. And so as I learned how to do this, feeling about me, it just expanded. And in May, later on this month, Laura and I will celebrate 37 years of marriage. 37 years. Bless her heart. Yes, exactly. And she's the only girl that I've been sober with the whole time. My first two marriages, and Laura's my third marriage, my first two marriages were victims of my alcoholism. They never stood a chance, no matter how much I wanted those marriages to work, to wonderfully nice women, they never stood a chance because alcohol became breath. It became everything possibly to me. Now recovery is everything to me. But it says on page 30 of the big book, we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And even before the first step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our life had become unmanageable. We have to concede to our innermost self. And my friend Mike said, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and the lights are out and nobody else is there. You know what the truth is about you. And we all know what the truth is about who we are, what we did, where we went, who we did it with. And we all know the degree of our alcoholism. And yet we fight against that. So we admit, because we want to be accepted. We admit we're powerless over alcohol, that our life had become unmanageable. But until we concede to our innermost self, until we fully concede that we are alcoholic, that there is no reason that we would ever want to drink again, we're likely going to drink again. Because just admitting something, there's a thing called coercion. And I'll tell you what you need to hear if it means I can stay. And what happens is, in my opinion, we paid lip service to the 12 steps. We don't really think that we're powerless of alcohol, that our life had become unmanageable. We don't really believe that we're insane. Did you know that step 2 is after step 1, but our insanity doesn't occur until we're sober? Think about that for a minute. My insane thinking does not occur until I'm not drinking. Because anytime that insanity would raise its ugly head, I would just drink. And I would remove it from the equation. But the insanity of my addiction does not occur. That's why I have to come to believe. We came to believe. And step 2 is a journey into spirituality. You talk about the how. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And unless we have a relationship with a power greater than ourselves, we're doomed to drinking. That's not just my opinion. That's the opinion of the big book. That's why they wrote chapter 4, We Agnostics. That's why they have all those personal stories in the back of the book. Not to tell you about everyone's journey of alcoholism, but tell you the journey how they found a power greater than themselves. Because without that power, we're doomed. We are doomed because alcohol would be too much for me if I did not have a power greater than myself. Because again, that power greater than myself directs me to you. When everything else about me was me. When I find my degree of uncomfortability, there's too much me between you and God. And that's just all there is to it. And in my opinion, in the opinion of the big book, I believe, is not designed to tell us how not to drink. It's designed to teach us how to have a relationship with a power greater than ourselves, that as a result of that relationship, we won't burn our life to the ground. Do you ever think of that? And that's what the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous does. Step 2, Step 3, Step 4, Step 5, Step 6, Step 7, Steps 11, and certainly 12 tell us that it's about a power greater than ourselves. And speaking of which, many of you have heard, if your higher power is a doorknob or a coffee cup, that's sufficient. That's bull. Talk to me after the meeting if you don't agree. And I expect some of you don't agree. But you have a coffee cup and a doorknob at home. What you don't have at home is us. You don't have the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says on page 17, there is a solution. It says, we're like the passengers of a great liner, when moment at the rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, rejoicing, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. But unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our own individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which now binds us. But that in itself would have not held us together as we're now joined. And then it talks about the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. It talks about finding a solution. So the fellowship is necessary for you and me to get well. Try doing this on your own. And if you make it back after you relapse, we'll love you until you can love yourself. So if a part of you, and that's the problem sometimes with treatment centers, you graduate. People who go to treatment centers graduate, but we never graduate from AA. We never graduate from wanting to help the next person. We never graduate from the 12 steps. Because 12 steps, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So when I get done with 11 and the first 2 parts of step 12, I have to go back through the steps. And as Joe and Charlie in their tapes, they call steps 10, 11, and 12 growth steps. They don't call them maintenance steps, they call them growth steps. They say they dare anyone to do steps 10, 11, and 12 without growing. Before you can do steps 10, 11, and 12, you need to do 1 through 9. You need to work with a sponsor. You need to be surrendered. We need to be surrendered even before we get with the sponsor, because as my sponsor, 46 years sobriety, says, we can't do steps 1 through 4 for them. We can do steps 5 with them. We can guide them through 6 and 7 on defects of character and shortcomings. We can even help them understand the power of 8 and 9. But we can't do steps 1, 2, and 3. You have to do that. You have to hit your bottom. Your bottom can't be my bottom any more than my bottom can be yours. Because what if it's not deep enough? What if mine is too deep? What if you don't have to lose the job? What if you don't have to lose the car? What if you don't have to lose the license? What if you don't have to lose the significant other, like many of us have? What if, check this out, what if you don't have to wake up in a jail cell finding out that you've killed a family of 5 and you don't remember your driving? And if you go to enough prisons and institutions, you're going to meet a man someday who doesn't remember engaging in a particular activity, and yet that's what they're in jail for. And I've met, I called the family the Jones family of 5. And you know what? I've never killed them. They're one of my yets. And as long as I don't drink, as long as I don't use, I'll never go through an intersection blind again, risking that family. And I've met, how many have met men like that, either in the rooms or in prisons or institutions? They don't even remember that they engaged in that behavior, and yet they're responsible for what the damages of that behavior done. I was drinking, I was this, I was high, I was this, that, and the other. That doesn't negate the fact that we have to pay for it. So if for no other reason, if that's not you, you have a reason to be grateful. I remember one time I walked into the Turning Point, and did you ever have one of those days where everything was upside down, and all you want to do is get to the end of the meeting so you can say you went to a meeting that day and go home and crawl under your covers? I've had those days, and I remember walking in, and Russian Ted, another guy with a nickname, said to me, "How's your day going?" And I said, "Well, if you really want to know, Ted," and I unloaded on Ted. It seemed like 45 minutes, but Ted would never let me talk that long. It was more like 45 seconds. And I got to the end of it, and Ted said, "Are you grateful?" And I thought, you didn't hear a word I said, because you got grateful out of that. And he looked at me and he said, "Whatever level you're grateful for today will determine the quality and the quantity of your sobriety tomorrow." And he turned around and walked away. If we don't find an avenue of gratitude for everything that happens in our life, Laura and I, like I said, we're walking through an opportunity right now, and we need to find a way to be grateful. Because if we're not grateful for everything, we're grateful for nothing. When was the last time we were grateful for what God didn't allow, God didn't do? We get so caught up in what God does, how He blesses, the answer to prayer, all those things that we get anxious and excited about. But when God says no, when God says not now, when God holds back truth so we don't have to experience the consequences of it, we don't know what waits us out there. Why not just stay here? But to stay here, we have to work the steps. We have to come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore sanity. And a lot of times, it says, became willing to make a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood Him. A lot of times, individuals get caught up. We think we have to know who the higher power is. We don't. We just have to be willing to turn our will and our life over to something. I had a friend of mine, and it really came to light when Laura and I, a few years ago, were vacationing in Florida. His name was Jim, a lucky alcoholic. And I met Jim back in 1988, and he had like 25 years sobriety. And Jim said, "Hey, my name is Jim. I'm a lucky alcoholic." He used to say to me, "The tide goes in and the tide goes out, and I don't get drunk in between." And I thought, that's kind of goofy. And then I was watching the Florida coastline one day. And it was early morning. I was sitting there over the balcony drinking coffee, just watching the tide, watching it come in, watching it go out, watching the tide come in, watching the tide go out. And I think, I finally, after all these years, it was like 30-some years of sobriety, I finally understood what Jim meant. And that was his higher power. But that worked for him. You have to become willing. We have to become willing to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. Because if we don't turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood Him, we're going to turn our life back over to our addiction. And then step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. A lot of times we think the searching and fearless moral inventory is a book. In step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. It doesn't say exact nature of our life. So do step 4 to the best of your ability, knowing that you're continually, for the rest of our life, utilizing step 11 and 12. And there's something miraculous that happens. God already knows it. I did not tell anything my sponsor was surprised about, and I already knew it. Right? When you think about step 5 in that way, what does God know that you don't? Probably everything, because he can see in the dark, which is kind of scary anyway. And my sponsor did things on an equal level or just as bad as he understands. And I already know everything I did. The challenge is step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. What defects of character are they talking about? Well, the defects of character we uncover in step 4. And the shortcoming, I had a person explain to me one time, he said, a defect of character is having a flat tire. And a shortcoming is not having a spare. So we have something going on with our life and we can't fix it because we're defective. We have something in our character that needs somebody else, that needs some other solution. And the shortcoming is, I don't trust enough. And how many times have we been afraid of step 8 when actuality we need to really be afraid of step 9? Because all we're doing in step 8 is making a list. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. You want to be afraid of something, don't be afraid of step 4, be afraid of step 5. If you want to be afraid of something, be afraid of step 9, not step 8. Because all we're doing is making a list. But you know what? The majority of people, unless we owe them financial, the majority of people we hurt on a familial, on a feeling basis. You want to make amends to someone, stay sober. Just stop burning our life to the ground. My dad, God bless him, my dad's been dead since August 1st of 1988. And when he dropped me off at the Brett Butler Motel on April 19th, 1986, my dad said to me, your mother and I aren't going to watch you die. You ever have a family member say that to you? Get out of our life because we don't want to see you. You're on the path of destruction. And we're tired of seeing you destroy yourself. What's amazing is, without making amends on any level to my dad, in 9 months, in December of that year, he would be over at my house having Christmas dinner. And he came up to me and he gave me a hug and he gave me a watch, which I still have to this day. And he said, are you ready for this? He said, your mother and I used to worry about you, but we don't worry anymore. And that's all my dad wanted. That's all my dad just, I'm a junior. And my dad just wanted his son not to die. And now he saw his son die. His son live in a way that he never thought he would experience because he'd been seeing me dying for all the years. And through marriages and through other family members, my brother George said something very profound to me a few years after I was sober. He said, Bobby, if we could have done anything for you, we would have done it. But you taught us it was best to leave. And now today, we communicate on a regular basis. We communicate over this personal situation that Laura and I are walking through. And he's very compassionate, he's very caring, he's very thoughtful. But I've never done anything to go and correct. All I've done is stay sober. You want to make the majority of people in your life happy? Just don't drink, just don't use, just don't burn your life to the ground. And all of a sudden they'll start to view you rather differently. And that's steps 8 and 9. And steps 10, 11, and 12, taking a daily inventory. It says continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit it. continued. You know, that word implies that I've been doing something up to that point. Otherwise, it would say, take your inventory, like it does in step 4. But it's saying continue to take personal inventory. And when, not if, but when I'm wrong, I promptly admit it. So Laura and I, full disclosure, we were in a big argument on the way down here. I felt very hypocritical standing before you tonight because I didn't think I was carrying the message of sobriety. And I told her I was sorry because I love her. And I want the ride home to be a pleasant one, and I want our time together tonight to be pleasant. So I said, I'm sorry. And I didn't worry about whether or not what her contribution to the argument was. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's when I am wrong, not when she is wrong, not when other people are wrong. When I am wrong, I promptly admit it. And I said to her, I'm sorry for raising my voice. I'm sorry for getting angry over something that you're obviously upset about as well. Would you please forgive me? And we had a wonderful dinner. That's a sign from God, I would hope. But that's what that step 10 does. So no matter how far you go, you're always going to be doing steps 10. And there's nothing better than sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood it. Praying only, it's an inclusive word, only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Here we gave up power. We recognize we're powerless over alcohol in step 1, only to gain power. Step 1, I had to admit I was powerless over alcohol because it only served me. And I'm the problem. Alcohol is not the problem. If alcohol was the problem, then everyone who drank would have our life. And that's not true. People like you and me, and if you Google the medical differences between an alcoholic and non-alcoholic, you'd be surprised how we metabolize things much differently than a person who doesn't have a problem with alcohol. But God directs me. You know how I know God directs me to you? Because it says so in step 12. Because this is a 12-step program, not 11. I don't get to stop at step 11. I'm directed. I having had a spiritual awakening, we tried. So don't be discouraged when someone doesn't hear your message of hope, of reconciliation, of sobriety. Because as long as you're trying to carry the message, that's our obligation. I would imagine when I go into treatment centers, I'm going to go into one Friday night, I would imagine that a number of the participants in this treatment center will be drunk the next day, will be drunk the minute they get out. But that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is carrying the message. That's why Laura and I drove down from Palm Coast, because we carried the message. When Dean said, hey, I've got an opportunity for you to speak, that's why I was here speaking, because we carry the message. Whether or not you receive the message is none of my business. That's between you and that's between God. And then we practice the principles in all our affairs. I live in steps 10, 11, and 12, and my wife will tell you, I try to be the best version of me every single day. But it starts with step 1. I know that if I was to ever drink again, I'd be gone. So I do steps 10, 11, and 12. Steps 1 through 9 get us sober. Steps 10, 11, and 12 keep us sober. And if you've been around for a while and you work with men who have relapsed, they don't relapse because of what they did. They relapse because of what they don't do. And so, as a point, and I'll close with this, when we work with someone who has relapsed, we don't go back to step 1 through step 12. We go from step 12 to step 1. We work the steps backwards to find out what they stopped doing to think they could drink. Now, eventually, they're going to get to step 1. But we follow. When did you stop practicing the principles in all our affairs? When did you stop trying to carry the message? When you stop acknowledging, you go through step 10, 11, you go through step 10. When did you stop taking inventory? When did you stop saying you're sorry? When did you stop caring about the people you have harmed? When did you stop worrying about your shortcomings? When did you think you didn't have a defective character? When did you stop admitting to God, to somebody else? When did you stop taking your personal inventory? When did you stop turning your will and your life over to the care of God? When did you stop thinking you were insane? When did you stop thinking your life had become unmanageable? Oh, when did you stop thinking you could have another drink? And that's how the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works. And I'm going to read you a page I've already quoted because it is my favorite page of the big book. Page 17, on There's a Solution. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who are just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as in many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists amongst us a friendship and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We're like the passengers of a great liner when moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joy, sense of and democracy pervade the vessels from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside of having gone our own individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which now binds us, but that in itself would have not held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out in which we can absolutely agree and join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. My name is Robert, recovered alcoholic. Thank you.